Thank you for allowing me to come to speak today on such an important topic. I am a spokesperson for an organization called Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, and my purpose here today is to try and convey to you the information we've learned over the past decade. Since the 1990s, evidence had continued to mount which concerned the medical community that Chinese transplant practices were just completely unethical. And this goes back to what he mentioned before in 1998, when a prison guard testified here, and then in 2001, a Chinese medical doctor named Wang Guoji fled to the United States, testified in front of Congress that China was using organs from executed prisoners. This was something the Chinese Communist Party at the time completely denied. Many doctors then started becoming very alarmed at the rapid exponential increase in transplantations that were taking place in China since 1999. And then the number of transplant centers just took off. China's transplant centers went from 150 in 1999 to over 600 by early 2000. And according to Chinese Vice Minister of Health, the number of transplants performed each year went from several hundred in 1999 to well over 10,000 a year by 2008. And the China Daily newspaper reported that the actual number in 2006 was 20,000. And now it is widely recognized that China performs the second most amount of transplantations, only second to the United States. Even more troublesome is evidence that China seemed to have an overabundance of organs and that their medical tourism business was booming. They had hospitals advertising all over the internet that they could guarantee patients organs within the time frame of weeks, and they could even schedule them in advance. To put that in perspective, the United States waiting time for a kidney is over 3 years. It became apparent that China's organ harvesting was an extremely profitable business, with the Chinese medical centers often saying that their #1 source of revenue was their transplant unit, and that on their websites they were saying they were charging $30,000 for a cornea, $60,000 for a kidney, $150,000 for a heart. Imagine what one person was worth in the hundreds of thousands. Some people may think, it makes sense. China is such a large country, so many people. But you really need to take a few factors into consideration. One, China does not have a formal public organ donation program. And two, they have no organized national distribution system. And even though they tried many times, the Beijing Red Cross themselves stated in 2011 that over the past 20 years, only 37 people nationwide had registered to become an organ donor. Take that in comparison to the United Kingdom, who has 18 million people as registered donors. Many people believe this is because the Chinese people have very strong spiritual belief that they need to be buried with their organs intact. So the question becomes, how has China become the #2 transplant country in the world, and where are these organs coming from? Well, in 2005, the Vice Minister of Health of China admitted that over 95% of the organs transplanted come from executed prisoners. And then in 2010, he stated again that between 1997 and 2008, China had performed more than 100,000 transplantations, and over 90% of the organs came from executed prisoners. This is China saying that themselves. Although the Chinese government admits the major source of organs is from executed prisoners, they don't actually give official numbers for either the amount of people they execute every year or the amount of people they transplant every year. If you look at many experts, they try to estimate it. It's anywhere from about 2,000 to 8,000 executions a year takes place in China, which is more than all the world combined. But that still falls short of the 10,000 organs that they're saying they're transplanting every year. So the numbers don't add up. Even if they executed 10,000 a year and transplanted 10,000 a year, there would still be a very large discrepancy. Why is that? It's simply impossible that those 10,000 people executed would match perfectly the 10,000 people that needed the organs. You really have so many factors that go into play when you're transplanting somebody. And many times we'll use the ratio of 10 to 1. It takes 10 people to find a suitable donor for one person. So if we go by those numbers, they couldn't be just executing 10,000 people. Doing it the way they say they're doing, they'd have to be executing around at least 100,000 people. Then there's the factor of time, which needs to be really understood. Once you harvest someone's organs, it's not that you can keep these organs around forever. There's a very short window of time. Take, for example, a heart, which only has about about 8 hours once removed from the body. And you have the fact that China's own state laws says that prisoners, once sentenced to execution, have to be executed within 7 days. And this almost happens automatically. So we don't have the situation in China where we have all these people on death row. It's just not like that. And this is so saying this means that the prisoners sentenced to death cannot fully account for all the transplantations that are taking place in China, especially when we talk about medical tourism patients. So how are they able to have this quote-unquote on-demand transplant system that's capable of extremely short times? The only way they can be doing this is if they have another source of living donors that are available on demand. And I say living donors. And this is where, in some cases, the actual transplant operation itself becomes the method of execution. It has been through many different investigations that we now come to believe that it's prisoners of conscience, including Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetans, Uyghurs, house Christians, who are being killed for their organs. And many of us now believe that the practitioners of Falun Gong may be one of the worst victims, because they comprise by many, or believed by many, to be the largest population of prisoners of conscience in China today. Also, if you look at the timeline of the onset of China's boom in transplantations and the onset of the persecution of Falun Gong, it almost runs in complete parallel, with both of them starting in 1999. Plus, you have the fact that Falun Gong practitioners become particularly vulnerable because they often don't give their true identities while in prison to protect their family and loved ones. We also know that they're subjected to tests like blood and urine tests, physical exams, ultrasound evaluations multiple times while they're incarcerated. How can all this be possible? Well, China has a very unique situation where the military controls the prison systems, the forced labor camps, and the majority of hospitals performing these transplantations. Therefore, they're able to do all the coordinating to make it possible, and they have the ability to do it secretively. So where does this put us? Well, we have American doctors, we have American hospitals, we have American universities facing an extremely important dilemma, and we have a place where American doctors need to know what's going on. Currently, we have physicians, like Dr. Danovich just said, have their patients going to China for organs. We have our own hospitals training these transplant surgeons from China. We have our universities participating and funding research in China on transplantation. We have our certain well-known pharmaceutical companies selling the transplant medications needed to do the transplants, and even funding clinical trials in China to develop new ones. If we look at the numbers, every day there's a few dozen people being killed for their organs. And if we wait another 5 years, as the Chinese Medical Association has said it's going to take to stop this, there's a possibility of another 50,000 innocent lives that will be taken. I stand before you today hoping that the U.S. government will perform an official investigation into this matter and release all evidence it has about China's transplant practices. How can we expect our doctors and hospitals to make good decisions without all the information? In fact, our medical community could become accomplices to this horrible, terrific tragedy. I recommend also Congress pass a resolution condemning China's forced organ harvesting from prisoners and prisoners of conscience. Thank you.